Hi, Miss Galloway.
Oh, can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. I am pulling up your email. And the final presentation. How are you doing today?
Good. How about yourself? We're close to Thanksgiving break.
I know my kids can hardly wait.
Are you guys traveling?
We are about halfway through the break. We're going to Miami.
Oh, nice. Ooh.
Yeah, so
I'm sure
super
the
excited.
weather's better there than here.
I'm sorry.
I'm sure the weather's better there than here.
I'm hoping so. Today was just so dull and dingy and
It
yeah.
was. It was nice on Wednesday. It was really nice.
Mm-hmm.
Very sunny.
Okay. I'm waiting to somehow the
thing I want to say is that there are so many programs that have been rolled out across many colleges and state systems and private schools where in many of these cases, they no longer offer aid. They offer more like grants, so you don't ever have to pay the money back. And there's generous inclusion of study abroad and other things that a person would need on campus. So I just think that the landscape is changing, and don't negotiate against yourself. Don't assume that you can't, afford a place without checking to see what programs and things they might be offering that you might be eligible for if you want to cast your net wider or you think that a school is a good fit for you. So I'll hand it off with that.
Thank you, Danielle, for that. I do want to start with I want to welcome everybody. We have quite a few people that have joined today, and I know there are several parents that do take advantage of our recording sessions as well. So this call today is being recorded. And I wanted to say that Ms. Galloway has done similar sessions for us last year as well. So if there were different topics that you were interested in, those topics are also they have been recorded and they were placed on the PTO website. I will be putting that that web link in the chat so that everyone can access it. But we'll get this session started today. What I do want to say is a huge thank you to Danielle Batchelor. She is the chair for the College Readiness Committee, and through thick and through thin, through busy days, through sick days, through rainy days, Danielle's always there to kind of lead us through and make sure that these calls happen for us. In addition, I want to say a huge thank you to Ms. Galloway. Ms. Galloway, the day that you and I met, almost a year ago, I think at this time, was such a special day because since then we've been able to collaborate and bring these calls to our parents. And every time a parent sits in to one of these calls for the first time, there's always praise and there's always a lot of things going around, especially at this time of the year. I want to especially say thank you to you, Ms. Galloway, for all the time you spent. And I will say that you don't get paid for this, but that you do it, from the goodness of your heart and for the fact that there's all these parents that are looking for information. So on behalf of all of them, I want to say thank you. And with that, I'm going to hand it over. We'll follow the same format. Ms. Galloway will take us through her presentation, and there is a good chunk of time reserved at the very end for question and answers. So save your questions if you want. You can put them in chat, and if Ms. Galloway doesn't come through right away with the answer, she will get to it once we get to the Q&A session. So we'll get through the entire presentation, and then we'll open up the floor for Q&A. Okay, with that, I'll hand it over.
Thank you guys so much. I just want to say that, you know, in order for us to get the students to do what they need to do, you know, I always like to work with the parents. So I love working with parents because when you guys know things, that's when we can get the work done on the student side. So I'm always grateful to collaborate with you guys. I also want to piggyback off of what Ms. Danielle mentioned earlier. I know oftentimes we have a lot of students who don't apply for financial aid because they assume that they don't qualify, but we always want to encourage students to exhaust all their options first because you just never know, especially with the upcoming changes with FAFSA, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But I just really want to quickly talk about the cost of a higher education. I recently got my master's in higher ed, and so that really helped formulate a lot of this presentation. And so just without further ado, we'll just talk about all the various kinds of financial aid that students might be applying for. And so, oh, there we go. Okay, cool. So again, the whole purpose of this session, first to talk about the cost associated with students pursuing a higher education. There's a lot of students, it's a lot more expensive than students may think, depending on the institution that you're going to. Also talking about different ways that students and families can alleviate these costs, and also the types of applications that you guys may be filling out with your students to qualify for some type of aid. And so just kind of like an agenda or run of show. So first, we're going to talk about the cost associated with attending college. We usually call it the COA, or the cost of attendance. We're also going to talk about what financial aid is, applying for financial aid, and the different types of applications, and then also scholarships. Scholarships is a big one because a lot of students, they kind of disqualify themselves before they even start an application. They think, oh, there's too many students applying for this application, so I'm not going to go for it. But I've noticed the biggest downfall of students is follow through. So they'll start, but they won't finish it. So we'll talk a little bit about scholarships as well. And so how much does college cost? Interesting. So tuition and fees. So essentially those are the classes that the students are registering for and the various fees that are associated with going to that college or that institution. Books and supplies could also be factored into how much college costs. Room and boards, otherwise housing, also meal plans. A lot of students don't know, but when you apply for housing on campus, you have to have a meal plan. A lot of students think they can get out of that, but unfortunately you cannot. You have to have a meal plan on campus. And then also we're just going to talk about miscellaneous items, so transportation. So if you're going to college on the Northeast, you have to have a way to get back to and from home. Also, a lot of students don't know you have to pay to do your laundry on campus, cell phone, and like little things like that. But two of these things are highlighted specifically because as far as, which I think is on the next slide, as far as what's going to be included.
Ms. Galloway, I think we can't see your slides for some
really?
reason. I just want to make sure that we're not having a glitch.
Let's see.
That's interesting. I can see it. Here, let me see if I can share, and maybe that's interesting.
Not sure.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, it's visible.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. Thanks for saying that.
Yeah, no worries. I think this is where you were.
Yes, I have two of these highlighted, specifically tuition and fees and room and board, because when financial aid is paid out, financial aid is only taking care of billable items. So on the next slide, you'll see that the cost of attendance makes up direct costs and indirect costs. So the direct cost is your tuition and fees. So essentially the classes you're registered for and the various fees that you incur on campus, and then your room and board and your meal plan. Those are the direct costs. And that's what financial aid, if you qualify, that's what financial aid will take care of. Indirect costs is books and supplies, travel expenses, kind of what we said on the previous slide, and miscellaneous items. And so again, just bear in mind that direct costs are the things that are going to be automatically on the student bill whenever financial aid is paid out, or if you're paying out of pocket. So on the next slide, I think these are just, I'm going to show, I think there's about 3 of them. So when you go on a college's website, for one, by law, they have to have the cost of attendance on their website. And so I usually tell students, when you're doing your research and you're building your college list, first, make sure you're looking at the cost of attendance. I think students get really wrapped up in, like the prestigious of schools, really big name schools that are really popular, and they don't necessarily look at how much they cost. And so this is the cost of attendance for UT Austin. Is a public institution and it's in state. So if you look, for students who may be living on campus, tuition alone is kind of like near 14K, and that's just tuition. And then you still have to figure out room and board, which is another 15K. So me personally, when I'm calculating cost of attendance as far as what financial aid is going to pay for or what the student is going to be billed, I only look at the tuition and fees and the room and board. As far as transportation, books and supplies, all the miscellaneous items, those things are variable. I know when I was in college, I did not spend over $700 on textbooks and supplies. So these are very variable costs. So I usually don't factor that into the actual cost of attendance or what I'm going to be billed or invoiced. And so moving forward, I think the next one, this is for Trinity, which is private and is still here in Texas, but Trinity's tuition alone is $51,000, which is pretty expensive. And then you have to take into account room and board, which is almost another $15,000. So you're looking at a good like maybe $65K to attend to Trinity, which is a private school. So just bearing in mind, I told students just keep in mind that tuition at a private institution is definitely going to be a whole lot more than the tuition at a public institution. And then moving forward, I think this one is, there it is. This one is the University of Southern California, which not only is out of state, but is also a private institution as well. And so tuition alone is about like $67,000, very expensive. They have fees, and then the housing is another 12. Well, really, housing and then your meal plan is almost another 20K. So you're looking at almost 80K to attend USC, this institution. So this is just kind of like to get people to understand, like it does vary across different campuses. So this is, I actually love this. Students actually really enjoy this too, because I don't think they understand like exactly like what their bill may look like. So if you look, this is for the fall, this is when I was at UTSA. So this is my actual bill for my first semester at the University of Texas, San Antonio. Now, granted, at that time, I did not know I was going to be a college advisor. That was nowhere on my brain at all, but I just kept this and I've always had it. And I'm glad that I did, because it really does put it into perspective for students how much they're going to be billed essentially to go to the university. And so I highlighted a few items on this bill. So the housing for that semester was almost $3,500. My tuition was about like $2,300. As you can see, I had a meal plan, and then there's the tuition. And so whenever you guys go on college visits or you go on college tours, you know, they're touring the institution, they're like, oh, well, this is the rec center, it's free. All you need is your ID to get in. But I mean, it's free, but you're paying for it, right? As you can see, I think rec center fee, it was $120. So I tell students all the time, once you actually get to the college that you're going to, making sure that you're actually utilizing these, a lot of these services and a lot of these centers, because you are paying for it and you can see it in your bill. As you can see, I had a parking fine, it was like $60. But I tell students all the time, if you see, yes, it's free, but you are paying for it. So just make sure that you take advantage of everything that there is to take advantage of on campus. I think another one, undergraduate advising. So I tell students all the time, if you're uncertain about what kind of class to register for, you have an advisor on campus. You're paying that fee. Also, the writing center, well, it actually says $0. I'm not sure why it says that, but as you can see, these are a lot of the fees that are on campus. So when they say tuition and fees, this is what it's going to look like once they register for classes and they're billed. And so on the next slide, so this is the bottom part of that screenshot. So this is what my payouts look like. So if you see for my first semester in college, it was about 94. I'm gonna estimate it was about 9,400 my first semester. And so I didn't get a lot of financial aid, mainly because I came from a pretty middle class family. I got some stuff, but I did have to take out loans. And so when my financial aid paid out, it paid out about like 87. So I definitely had a balance. I had a balance of like almost $600. And so thankfully I did have work study. I worked on campus and I just kind of like gradually got the balance down. But I just have students, I tell them that typically you won't even get a bill until after you register for classes. And then once you apply for housing and you get housing. So students are often like, oh, I don't know what my bill looks like, but you have to register for classes first. And they typically won't do that until the summer after they graduate, when they go off to orientation. And then once they register for housing. So I just like to show students this, because then it kind of like, it they're like, oh, okay, I get it now. So if you look at my financial aid, it looks like I paid $60 probably for that parking fee that I had. It looks like I did a check of almost $4. I did a cash payment. I did get a UTSA grant, which was about $1,600. At the time, they don't do this anymore, but it was called the Texas Beyond Time Loan. Essentially, if you graduated with at least a 3.0 and you graduated within 4 years, they would forgive the loan. So it was a loan, but if you met certain conditions, they would forgive it. And then, of course, I had subsidized and unsubsidized loans. So I hope this kind of like puts it in perspective of like what the bill looks like, how the financial aid pays out, and what they could be expected to cover and might not cover. So now we're talking about the types of financial aid that students could potentially qualify for. So financial aid is pretty much help or aid. So it could be a grant, it could be a scholarship. If they work on campus, it could be paid employment, but all these things will help the student like get that bill down to zero. And so financial aid could be based off of need. So if your family has the need for it, also merit. So if students are getting scholarships and grants just simply based off of academics, so GPA, test scores, and stuff like that. Or it could also be a combination of both. And so with work study, essentially the student works on campus and they get paid. I know when I worked on campus, it really is up to you because they do give you a check and it's really your responsibility if you have a balance to make sure that you're making the payments accordingly. Since my balance wasn't that much, after a while, I kind of was able to just keep my checks and save them up. Also, there's loans. So loans do have to be paid back. I do want to say that you don't have to just fill out FAFSA for loans. You can get loans a variety of ways, but FAFSA is one of the places where you can get student loans. And then also there's grants. The grants, of course, you do not have to pay them back. And I wouldn't say mostly, but most of the time they are need-based aid. And then scholarships, they're based on need or merit. We usually call them gift aid. So the scholarship is a gift, meaning that you don't necessarily have to, or not necessarily, you don't have to pay the money back. Now, most scholarships may have certain conditions that you may have to meet. So maintaining a certain GPA, making sure you're still enrolled full time. But with scholarship, you don't have to pay that money back. And so on the next slide, so sources, so where's a lot of students are like, where's this money come from? Oftentimes they're just applying to college. They're not sure where the money is going to come from. They're not worried about any of that. But the sources of financial aid, the federal government, of course. So we're going to talk about that in the next slide, but you can get it from the federal government, the state. Also, you can get a good deal of financial aid. So those grants and those scholarships from the institution themselves, so the colleges and the universities. And also we have private institutions as well. So Sallie Mae is one of them, or your banks also give out student loans for students as well. And then on the next slide, so applying for financial aid, this is going to be a doozy because it's a lot of information. So there's 3 types of applications. So we have the FAFSA. You do have to be a U.S. citizen, or you have to be on a certain visa to apply for financial aid. Financial aid is typically from the federal government. There's also the TASFA. So with the FAFSA and the TASFA, students aren't doing both. They're only doing one or the other. So TASFA is typically for students who may be here on a work permit. Maybe they have DACA. They could be undocumented, but maybe they've been living in Texas their whole life. You typically have to be living in Texas at least a year, so 12 months to do TASFA. But I tell students you're only doing one or the other. And then there's also, in addition to that, students may also be doing the CSS profile. I call the CSS profile the nosy cousin of the FAFSA. It's very intrusive, but we will talk about that on a later slide. And so kicking off our financial aid applications, there's the FAFSA. It stands for the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. And so typically with the FAFSA, it is changing this year. So FAFSA typically opens in October. This year it's opening in December. We actually just got word yesterday because we weren't sure when the date was. We're kind of just on our toes about it. But they said it could open as late as December 31st. And so that's what we're banking on. Isn't that something? New Year's Eve, that's when FAFSA will open up. But with FAFSA, this is to qualify for aid at the federal government. And then also to get state aid, they will also use information provided on the FAFSA as well. And so with the FAFSA, students could qualify for, as you can see, there's these grants here. And so the first 2 grants are federal grants. So we have federal Pell Grant, and then we have the, we call it the SCOG grant, and then also the loans. So there's subsidized and unsubsidized. One really cool way that I use to determine the two is unsubsidized. They're uncool, meaning that they're going to accrue interest on the loan while they're in school, and then subsidized loans, they're not accruing interest until after they graduate. Also, there's Parent Plus loans. Parent Plus loans, and this is a personal opinion, they're a little bit predatory, often only because if your student does take out a subsidized or unsubsidized loan, the student is taking that out in their name. So, that's their responsibility. But with the Parent Plus loans, for one, the Parent Plus loans, the amounts are insane. So they could be like they can offer you a $36,000 Parent Plus loan, but the parent is taking it out in their name. So I usually tell students, if Parent Plus loans are something that you want to do, I typically stay away from them, but it definitely needs to be a conversation had between you and your student if you guys are going to take out that Parent Plus loan. Just because they're really large amounts, and when you do take out the loan, you are taking it out in your name, as opposed to the student taking it out in their name with the subsidized and unsubsidized. And so FAFSA is just applying for aid at the federal level, so from the federal government. And they typically do use this to calculate financial need. And so a lot of students, we have students every year who don't do the FAFSA because they don't think they'll qualify, but you just never know. It doesn't hurt to put in the application, especially this year. I think on the next slide, this year they're changing FAFSA, they're changing the formulas. It's called the Better FAFSA now. And so it's supposed to be good because more students are going to be qualified for the Pell Grant. So we're kind of excited about it because students who typically wouldn't have gotten aid in the past would be getting aid now with the FAFSA. And so with the FAFSA, the students are applying for the FAFSA, but the students do need to do it with their parents because the FAFSA is going to ask a lot of information. So tax information, so your AGI. So we do tell students they do need to do it with a parent, but the student is applying for it. So the student is creating the account, they're going through providing the information, and then you guys are going to be there. You guys need to have an account too. And I'm actually going to talk about it here, but I want to talk about the differences between the new FAFSA. And so every time I think I have FAFSA down pat, they make changes. But these are about 11 changes that we can expect to see, or that we will see on the FAFSA. So with the new FAFSA, instead of it being like 100+ questions, it's going to be shorter, more user-friendly, and it's going to be about 40-ish questions. I think it said 43. Also, they're going to be using a new term on the FAFSA called contributor. And so with the FAFSA, the student needs to have an FSA ID, and also the parent needs to have an FSA ID, because going into the third bullet point, this year, students who are applying for financial aid, they're going to have their parent transfer data directly from the IRS. And so last year, it was called the IRS data retrieval tool. I highly encourage using it only because there's less room for error. So it's essentially you have to provide them permission to basically pull your tax information and input it directly into the student's FAFSA. So it's supposed to be a whole lot more streamlined. It's supposed to be a lot easier, but you do have to give the Department of Education consent to receive the information directly from the IRS. And it does a lot of the work for you. So I know when I was doing FAFSA, like 11 years ago, me and my mom had to sit down and we had to actually put the numbers in, and it leaves more room for error because it's like line 22 and you have to put that information in. Now, all you simply have to do is just give the Department of Education permission to pull it directly from the IRS, and it goes into it. Another change with the FAFSA is that it's going to be available in more languages. So formerly it was just English and Spanish, but now I think it said it's maybe about 20 additional languages, which is good. Previously, students could only list 10 schools on the FAFSA. Now they can list up to 20. And so we know our students are applying to 25 schools, but now they can list up to 20 schools on the FAFSA. They're also changing the need analysis formula. So again, students who typically would not qualify for Pell Grant could potentially qualify for it with this upcoming update to the FAFSA. Last year, it was called the EFC, so the expected family contribution. Essentially what that is after you submit your FAFSA, they're going to tell you your EFC, and it's typically like a 5 to 6 digit code. And so it's not what the student is eligible for, but the colleges, when they receive the FAFSA, is going to help them determine how much aid to award the student. And so we're not doing EFC anymore. It's something called Student Aid Index, so SAI. And so that's going to be new. We're typically used to the EFC, but they're shifting from that, and it's called the SAI. Also on the FAFSA, they're removing the question. On the previous FAFSA, it asked how many students or how many of your children will be in college. And so if you had 2, you would put 2. They're removing that question entirely, and it's not going to be used to calculate the SAI. Also, they're changing a lot of the rules for divorced parents. And so they're using the qualifications that the IRS use. So again, a lot of this stuff, we're not quite sure how this is going to look on the new application, but these are the changes. And there's, again, more students should be eligible for aid.
Ms. Galloway, there was a question in the chat that was, how are Parent Plus loans different?
Oh, so Parent Plus loans are different. For one, the amounts are larger. I mean, astronomically large. So typically, whenever if a student was awarded like a subsidized or unsubsidized loan, the amounts are pretty small. So I've never seen those loans pass $3,000. They're usually like $1,500, like $1,700. They're smaller amounts. But with Parent Plus loans, I mean, those loans are, I've seen like $36,000 Parent Plus loan. And so it's different because if you were to accept that Parent Plus loan, you as the parent has to do the application on behalf of your student. If a student was to accept an unsubsidized or subsidized loan, that's the student accepting it on them, meaning once they graduate, after their 6 months is up, the student will be paying that loan back. But with Parent Plus loans, after the student graduates, the parent will be paying that loan back because they took it out on behalf of their student. I hope that makes sense. But
yeah, that's helpful. And you said that you do either FAFSA or the Texas version, but do you apply for both and then see what you're awarded and then decide which one to accept, or do you have to decide which one you're going to apply for?
Yeah, so you have to decide which one you're going to apply for. And there is a eligibility quiz. So whenever you're doing the TASFA, it's going to ask you, like, how long have you lived in Texas? Because TASFA, so Texas is one of the few states that actually gives state aid. I won't say federal aid, but Texas is one of the few states that gives state aid to students who, and I don't want to say students who aren't from the US, but we do have students who might be undocumented, or we may have students who are on certain visas and they're waiting, to get their citizenship. We have students who may be on DACA, and so technically they're not considered a US citizen, but Texas, they can get aid from the state government, but not from the federal government. So it's only one or the other. So if a student is a US citizen, they were born here, they're using FAFSA. Also, but if you weren't born here, but if you're on a certain visa, and they're changing the visas, so I can't tell you the exact ones, but if you're on a certain visa, you can do the FAFSA. But if you're not on one of those visas that's approved, you have to do the TASFA. And I think the TASFA is on the next slide, but I think the presentation,
the presentation is gone again.
Just one moment.
Yep, just one moment, sorry.
I guess I'll take this quick minute to say that I met a student, I think it was at Pomona on a tour, and he was an international student, but he made the point that he had received financial aid from some places and he had not received quite as much from Pomona as he had from somewhere else, but he really, really wanted to go there, and his financial situation had changed some since he had applied, making it almost impossible for him to accept their offer. And so he just went back to them and explained the situation, and they asked him for documentation of some of the changes or things that were going on that had changed in his life, and he supplied them, and they came through with the entire difference. Just also be aware that you can sometimes go back and ask, or the student can ask on their own behalf if they're close, but it's not enough to allow them to accept their dream school.
Yeah, with that, so some schools they are flexible with like special circumstances. And so kind of what you were mentioning, like if a student has a special circumstance, but I tell students all the time with the special circumstance, you have to be able to like back up what you're saying. There has to be like, I don't want to say a paper trail, but they have to have proof and they have to submit
Yeah,
it.
absolutely. Right. It can't be just a narrative.
Yeah, we've had some special cases. I want to say I think last year we had a student. She did early decision 2 to Boston, and she did. I will say the student did her research. She did the net price calculator. She sat down with her dad and was like, "Hey, is this a number that we can do?" And he was like, "Absolutely." So whenever she got her financial aid package, it was way off. They were expecting her to pay a whole lot more than what the net price calculator was saying. And so, I told her we can do a special circumstance, we can appeal the financial aid decision, but I was like, you do need to, back up what you're saying. And so it turns out that the college actually saw that, her dad pulled from his 401k, which is taxed. And so they were able to actually come through and offer her a little bit more. So I used to tell students, there's a lot of intricacies going on, but I think students, they don't try, if that makes sense. And so I would tell students all the time, if it's a place where you really want to go, you'll make something happen. But sometimes it doesn't always work out in that fashion. But we've had some students where it did, and it was actually really good. Let's see. Oh, so this is TASPA. TASPA stands for Texas Application for State Financial Aid. For years, the TASPA was a paper application. So we have students literally having to do paper. And we would have to physically go to the financial aid office at that college and turn it in instead of doing it in the mail. It was a whole hassle. But this year, it is completely online, which is good. And TASPA actually goes through the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board. The only thing with TASPA is that only Texas schools will take it. And it's mainly Texas public schools. And so we usually tell students, like, if you know for a fact you're doing TASPA, just be mindful that, this is going to be like your in-state, like Texas schools. So like UH, UT, UNT, and stuff like that. So with the TASPA, as you can see, as far as the grants, these are only going to be state grants, so Texas grants. Students they're not eligible for Pell Grant at the federal level. They're not eligible for SCOG grant. And then also some colleges may give institutional grants as well. And so typically the financial aid packages do look a little different for a student who does FAFSA and a student who does TASPA, just because they're not going to be getting that aid from the federal government. But TASPA is typically for students who are like non-permanent residents or they're non-citizens of the U.S. And so we have it happen. A lot of students are like, I'm not sure if my citizenship is going to come in time. It could be a few months off. And so we usually have students do TASPA, just in case. And then we have had instances where their citizenship came in at the later end of the school year and they were able to do FAFSA. But TASPA is strictly for like in-state public schools, that application. And TASPA is not open yet either. TASPA is supposed to open whenever FAFSA opens. And so also just like to throw this in here, we tell students that I think this is going to be the 3rd year. Yes, I think this is the 3rd year, but financial aid is a graduation requirement. And so the way that students will satisfy this requirement is they'll either do one or the other, so FAFSA or TASPA, or we have quite a few students who do the opt-out form, which is fine too. We kind of like to use the opt-out form as a last resort because we do want all students to do financial aid, just because you just never know what you might be eligible for. So we tell students all the time, when you're doing FAFSA, even if you don't qualify for any grants at the federal level or the state level, when a college sees your financial aid application, you could qualify for aid at the institutional level. So we usually use the opt-out form as a last resort, but we just let students know that it is a graduation requirement in the state of Texas. On the next slide, I believe this is the CSS profile. Man, the CSS profile is a lot. And honestly, the CSS profile deserves its own session because it's a lot of information. So the CSS profile, it stands for the College Scholarship Service Profile. And
Ms. Galloway, is this the one that you were saying we were emailing about, that you said you might want to sort of parse it out and have it be its own, or at least a little more dedicated time?
Yeah, the merge person says she only did the presentation because I know when they give it to their
Oh, I can't hear you for some reason. I don't know if the rest of the group can.
Can you hear me now? No?
Oh, now say something.
No, you're better.
Let's see. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah, it
sorry.
just kind of went away for a second.
Okay. Yeah, the CSS profile, I know when Emerge gives the presentations, they actually give it in 2 parts just because it's a lot of information. And so she said, you know, she would be more than willing to do so. I just know that she's due in January. So if you guys do, because I know a lot of our students do apply to colleges that require the CSS profile. And so, and I think it's kind of like, I don't want to say it's a headache. It's just a lot of information. And so I do think it deserves its own presentation.
Could you give us just like the, you know, paragraph version,
Oh,
the,
yeah.
the Cliff's Notes version, and then we'll get that scheduled as part of one of our upcoming sessions, if at all possible.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank
And so
you.
I'm sure some parents are wondering, okay, like what's the difference between all these financial aid applications, right? So with FAFSA and TASPA, we're applying for financial aid at the federal and the state level, like from the government, right? With the CSS profile, you're applying for aid from the institution, so the college themselves. However, not all colleges require the CSS profile, but it is going to be a lot of the schools that our students are applying to, of course. So it's going to be a lot of those Northeast schools. They're mainly going to be private institutions that do require the CSS profile. Excuse me. With the CSS profile, what I will say is that it's very intrusive, it's very in-depth, it's very, I call it the nosy cousin of FAFSA, because FAFSA is really just looking at your tax information, right? So it's a little high level, it's not so in depth. But with the CSS profile, I mean, I've seen a question where they're like, oh, like, you know, do you own a vehicle? Are you leasing? Are you financing? If you're financing, how much do you have left on the vehicle? Like it's very intrusive and asks a lot of, so I usually tell students like, this is not something you can do on your own. You need to sit down with a parent and you need to do it. And again, I know it's very nosy. It seems like it's in your business, but oftentimes, like if you don't qualify for financial aid with FAFSA, there are some instances where you may qualify for financial aid from the college itself. And so we tell students not to skip over this, especially if you're looking for scholarships at the institutional level, so from the college or the university themselves. Like I mentioned, that student who early decision to Boston, they were able to go in and they saw again that her dad took out some money from his 401k that's taxable, and they were able to work something out for her in that case. So with the CSS profile, again, it's if you're wanting to get aid from the college itself. The CSS profile, so only, I think, go to the next slide. Only certain schools take it, and so this is just a snapshot of it, but not all schools take the CSS profile. It's mainly like your private ones, but it's over like 400 colleges. But yes, it is like one application, and the students just have to go in and add all of the schools that they wish to receive their CSS profile application. And then, oh, so what info is required for the CSS profile? They're looking at everything. They're looking at assets. With the FAFSA, you don't necessarily have to put your assets on there. I usually tell students, you really just want to do like the tax information, so the AGI, stuff like that. But the CSS profile, I mean, they're looking at income, they're looking at assets. So they're looking at, okay, like, do you own your home? Or are you leasing? How much do you have left on it? It's very intrusive information. And this is where they'll take into account those special circumstances too. So like if it's a student who may not be a US citizen, maybe they're working on their citizenship, excuse me, there's often times for them to incorporate those special circumstances in the CSS profile, and the college will actually like do a very in-depth look into what that looks like and stuff like that. Next slide.
And Ms. Galloway, you would submit that to any school that you would want to perhaps consider you for any sort of financial aid, or only once you've been accepted to a school?
No, so any school that you are hoping to gain acceptance to. So I know a lot of students who are applying to Rice. Of course, they're not hearing back from Rice right now, but Rice is wanting them to go ahead and start submitting the CSS profile.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. And so just some differences between the FAFSA and the CSS profile. Again, FAFSA is to get aid at the federal and the state level. CSS profile is more so from the college or the university themselves. CSS profile does open up October 1st. FAFSA used to be October, I think the year after. So if you have any students who are going to be seniors next year, it'll go back to October 1st. That's what we're hoping. The FAFSA is free, but with the CSS profile, not necessarily. I think it's like $16 per college, if I'm not mistaken, unless they have a fee waiver. With the FAFSA, they're not necessarily looking at info from a non-custodial parent. So we have instances where student maybe comes from a single parent household. They're really only looking at who provides the most support. But CSS profile, and it's really unfortunate because we do have students who are like, oh, I don't talk to this family, well, not family, I don't talk to this parent anymore. Like I have no contact with them, but CSS profile is going to want them to exhaust everything that they can to prove that they indeed do not talk to that parent. So it's kind of a hassle. Again, FAFSA is not looking at like your assets, like the kind of car you drive, your home, but the CSS profile is. As far as like the expenses, so what you guys, I don't say spend money on, but FAFSA is not looking at that, but CSS profile is. FAFSA does not take into consideration special circumstances, but the CSS profile does. What I will say though is that even if students are staying in state at a public institution, so let's say for example let's say for example students get their financial aid package and things change. It happens all the time. So because if you didn't know, FAFSA requires tax information from 2 years back, right? So when students are doing their financial aid applications in December, they're looking at taxes from 2022, even though we're getting ready to go into the next tax cycle. So oftentimes like a family may have been doing really well 2 years ago, but that's not the case now. And so depending on the institution, themselves will look into it, but it just depends. I just tell students they just need to make sure that they provide documentation and they back up their claims and stuff like that. Next slide. Okay, so scholarships. And students, they just discount themselves before they even really give themselves a chance. But as far as scholarships, they could be organizations related to their field of interest. So all the time, the counselors and I are getting emails like, hey, like we want to give scholarships to students who are looking into computer science. And so we get a lot of those opportunities all the time. And it's not necessarily like the district, like there are people who will reach out to Carnegie specifically like, hey, we want your students to apply for like this scholarship. There's also a lot of community organizations. I know the Indian Doctor Association, they reach out to us every year wanting Carnegie students to apply for scholarships. Also, it's the Chinese Professional Club. They offer a scholarship that they send to us every year. There's also scholarships at the institutional level, which I think we'll talk about on the next slide. And then also like local businesses will reach out to us too. And so I will say that you guys, your students definitely get opportunities that the district as a whole doesn't get, just because they specifically want Carnegie students to apply for those scholarships. And we usually send those to them via email, so they get them. I will say the scholarship opportunities aren't super, they're okay right now, but I know in the spring, the students are going to be very overwhelmed because that's when people are going to start rolling out their scholarship opportunities to us. And so I want to touch on a few scholarships at the institutional level that students overlook all the time. So for example, University of Texas at Austin, to qualify for some scholarships, they have an interest form and it's in their My Status portal. And so students don't do it all the time because it doesn't say required, it says recommended. And, you know, they kind of let time get the best of them and stuff like that. But that's one way. And so whenever students do get their financial aid packages in the spring, they're like, oh, I didn't get that much. And then I'm like, well, did you do the scholarship application? They're like, I don't even know what you're talking about. So students sometimes overlook these things because, like, for one, they're like, oh, I've already been admitted, I don't really care, whatever the case may be. And even if they're not admitted, it's okay to do these, because if UT Austin wasn't your #1 choice, but in the end, once you look at all your packages, they're giving you the most money, you know, it kind of would make sense, you know, to attend that institution. Another one is, I included, there's a ton of them. I just included a few examples for the presentation, but on the slide.
If I could just real quick on the Texas one, that I'm the chair for the Houston, Texas X's scholarship. So, and I've sat on the scholarship committee for a few years, but this year I'm the chair. So I can't emphasize enough how important it is for the students to check the box. If not, you won't be in contention. And every year when we get down to, you know, we have hundreds of volunteers that have to look through thousands of applications. Carnegie students really, really stand out. They rise to the top. Most volunteers have to go through 17 to 20 applications. And then when it comes to the interviews, when we get down to it and we start, we kind of get in a big room. There's a lot of us that are kind of at that level. And we start making comparisons and making decisions between if kids are going to get $1,000 or a $5,000, if they're going to get a one-time scholarship or they're going to get a recurring 4 to 5 year scholarship. So like major decisions, I mean, yes, I'm biased, but I don't even have to be biased. The way the Carnegie kids rise to the top and the way people talk about our kids, it's like, I have chills. They're so impressive. Like, I mean, they present like grown people compared to the other kids in the district. So, you know, even if you're, because I know our kids often don't think that they're doing well because they're comparing themselves to the other kids at our school, but compared to other kids everywhere, they're very impressive. So try to encourage your kids to apply. That's it.
Yes. They need to hear that themselves, the students, because they're like, oh, well, there's already, and they'll ask me like, well, how many students are already applying for this? I'm just like, it doesn't matter. It really is follow through. It's they'll start it, but they won't like see it through. So the students actually need to hear that themselves for sure. Another one is, and this is just a few examples, but there are a lot of colleges that have their own in-house scholarship. So with UTSA, of course, the students have to be admitted first and then they get access to this. But UTSA, I was looking at it the other day, and I mean, there was like almost 10 pages like worth of scholarship opportunities. And so I used to tell students all the time, like, once you've been accepted to a school, just look to see if they have their own in-house scholarship application. And, you know, even if this is not like your number one school, you just never know. Like, this school could be giving you the most money because you applied to the most scholarships. So this is another school that has their own like separate scholarship application. On the next one, there are some institutes. So Texas Tech, they consider students for scholarships with their admissions application. So I tell students all the time, like, make sure you're putting your best, even if you're top 10%, because it's the top, you know, students who are top 10%, they know they're going to be admitted to, you know, any public school in the state of Texas. So sometimes they don't put forth the best, you know, effort because they know they're going to be accepted. But Texas Tech, and on the next slide, I think it's Texas A&M, they consider students for scholarship within their admissions application. I told students it's super important whenever they have those supplementals. So like those 4 to 5 short response questions that you have to answer, it's really important that they put their best foot forward because they're going to use that to determine, if you're going to get any scholarships. I know we had a parent last year who was like, my son applied to Texas A&M and he didn't get any scholarships. And I think Texas A&M actually changed it recently, but they had an admissions application, and then under that, it was a scholarship one. And so again, students overlook it all the time, because they're just concerned with getting in first. But it's really important for some schools that they actually like submit the best admissions application possible, because they're using that to see what kind of scholarships to give students. And then, this was a definitely slept on one, I think. But I tell students all the time, especially if they're going to be in-state. For one, the in-state schools should be like their safety schools for the most part. But Terry Foundation, they partner with 11 schools in the state of Texas. And as you can see, they're all right there. And so I tell students, like, if you've already applied to these schools and you've been admitted, it would be, good to apply for Terry Foundation. Now, I created a cheat sheet for the students because the application process looks different at each school. It's not the same. And so I told students, we have students who apply to all of these schools as safeties, they get in, and so now they're waiting to hear back to see if they got Terry. But the Terry Foundation scholarship is a full ride. They pay for tuition fees, housing, but also it's a lot of support that they give to the students throughout their 4 years. We actually went to a presentation for the rodeo scholarship, and they presented there. And they just talked about a lot of support that they give to students. And I thought it was just amazing. But oftentimes we have a lot of students who don't consider applying for Terry because I'm like, oh, I'm waiting to hear back from Northeastern and stuff like that. But, it's okay to have a full ride kind of sitting on the side in case like your other schools don't work out. So Terry Foundation is another really good one. We also have the rodeo scholarship that is opening December 5th. And it's a $20,000 scholarship. So it's $5,000 a year, $2,500 a semester. We typically get at least one student from every HISD school gets it, but I think we had 2 last year, so which was pretty good. But the rodeo one is another really popular one. And I think students get discouraged because they feel like everyone's applying for it, but it's really follow through. I think we only ended up having, we had like a little over 200 seniors last year, and I think maybe only like 15 applied. So I was actually kind of shocked about that. But and we also have a volunteer. Her name is Ms. Rock. She's actually going to be presenting about the rodeo scholarship when we come back from the break. So we have that set up for students already. There's also the Haraldson Foundation. It's a $40,000 scholarship. So it's 5K a semester, so 10K a year, which is really good. I don't think we had anyone last year. I don't remember, but another really good opportunity for students who are going to UT. And so on the next one, we have the Doug Miller and Donna Sanders. We had 2 finalists. I don't think they pulled it through, but this is another really big one as well. But I know Ms. Chatna was saying traditionally they do get at least, Carnegie does get at least 1 or 2 who do get this scholarship as well. So these are just a lot of the big name ones that we push to students. There's also the George and Mary Hammond one. That's a $20,000 scholarship. I know for a fact we had 1 last year. I think there was another, but we had 1 last year for sure. But those are a lot of the really like big name scholarships that we push. And then again, a lot of those like local ones, like the Indian Doctor Association, the Chinese Professional Club, we do get those applications too, and we pass those on in the spring. But I think the biggest thing is like follow through for students. They think, like you said, they are in competition, so they think everyone else is applying for it, when in actuality, no one's applying for it because they think everyone else is applying for it. So it's really just follow through, I think. But I think I did okay on timing this week. And if anyone has any questions, and again, I know this is like pretty rushed and it was pretty quick, but I just kind of wanted to leave time for questions at the end.
That was perfect. Like you nailed it. I mean, because it's so much information and people were asking some questions along that we caught up with. So there's no outstanding questions in the chat. Does anyone want to just raise a hand or jump in and take your mic off and just go for it? I know we also, before we get off, want to mention the PTO scholarships that are, we do a senior scholarship in the spring, and students apply. They choose to apply, and it's one of the only things that that I know of, at least in Carnegie, where it's, you know, it factors everything in. It's not just your grades or just your some test score or something. Like, it's a very holistic process, and we're able to acknowledge some really great students who maybe have, you know, so many Carnegie students have really, really great scores and grades and stuff, but because the school is full of so many bright kids, you still may not be in the top 10% of your class, even if you're a total badass academically. So the PTO scholarships allow us to acknowledge and support and honor and highlight some of those students as well. So be on the lookout if you have a senior or when you have a senior, because they can apply and they go through an interview process. And Maria or Gary, I'm not sure this year if we've decided or announced at the board level what those gifts will look like, but so I don't want to comment on that. But
the budget is 7 $1,500 scholarships. So
perfect. Okay.
there will be 7 of those, and it's based on our mission statement. So it's not need based, and like Danielle said, it's not based on GPA. So it's who meets our mission statement as a PTO. So it's who represents Carnegie best inside and outside of the school. So we get great applicants, but sometimes it's really hard to get them to apply because they're kind of tired of doing stuff by then. So when you see the stuff go out, do encourage them to apply.
Yeah, Maria, actually, that was one of my questions from Ms. Galloway, is how can parents get kind of more involved or take a bit more of the load off of the kids? I know you said that so many of the scholarships, especially at the university level, are sent in with the application, but is there space for the parents to get involved and fill out any of these? How can we take over some of the work, since the kids are so overburdened at this point with doing all the personal statements and everything else?
Yeah, I usually tell students, so considering most of the scholarships are going to ask for some kind of, I don't want to say essay, but they may ask the students to reply to some kind of prompt. I usually encourage students to, you know, definitely work smarter, not harder. So, you know, they worked really hard on that personal statement. I read a lot of them. And so it's okay for them to take bits and pieces of it and incorporate it into that response for it also. And I know last year, you know, we used Naviance. And so when I sent a lot of information out, it was able to go to the student and the parent, but we're having a hard time utilizing that with school links because it's not the same, unfortunately. So I think even if I don't know if it would be helpful for me to a lot of the stuff that I send to students, I don't know if it would be helpful for me to send it to you guys, or if you guys have a listserv that I can include you guys on that so y'all can see a lot of this stuff, because I do think, again, the students see it and they're like, oh, okay, I'll get around to it. However, where the accountability comes in is that, oh, the parents saw it too. So it's like, oh, like, what does the progress look like on this application? And then also, you know, you guys speaking life into them too, which you guys do all the time. But I know oftentimes when they're like, oh, there's Ms. Galloway, she's about to have me do another scholarship application, you know, but also I think them hearing it, you know, from all facades is helpful too. So
Yeah.
if there's a listserv that you guys have, or if you guys just want me to send it to a specific email address and then you guys push it out, or even if I don't know, if I could send out like a I don't know, like a survey to collect email addresses. That way when I send it out to the students, the parents get it too, whatever like works.
Yeah.
Because that's one feature that I missed about Naviance was when I sent information out to the student, it also went to the parent. I love that a lot. But also you guys get to see what things are going on campus and stuff like that. And so if we can work something out, that'd be cool.
We can definitely work something out. I think this is information that parents would love to have. And it would super help our kids as well, you know, get double the hands, double the eyes on the same thing would be great.
Yeah, I'm
Okay.
also going to see if I can drop in that Terry Scholars cheat sheet that I created.
Okay.
Yeah, it took me a lot of time, but I hope it really helps the students a lot. Let me see. But yeah, there it is.
Okay. So while you're doing that, I did want to call for any questions. If anyone has questions, please do raise your hand. But for just kind of everyone's information, I did want to say that we are planning our next session sometime the week of November 27th. The date hasn't been finalized yet. We still kind of trying to get with some speakers, but it is going to be an external speaker. So we're going to give Ms. Galloway a break. She's definitely welcome to come, but we'll give her a break to kind of take the back seat and maybe listen in for a little bit. So we do have an external group coming in and presenting. And I know that the topic is going to be around, Danielle, do you have that handy?
Yeah, I was just pulling it up just to make sure. I'm pretty sure that the next one is around like sort of building your, let me just look it up really quick to make sure, but around building your your portfolio, so to speak, like how to market yourself, how to think about what courses to take, you know, internships, and summer programs, and sort of how to think holistically as you are going through high school, which is particularly helpful, maybe for some of the younger high school student parents, as well. And then also we're hoping that he'll have time, to also talk a little bit about then how do you position yourself in the application process using that information and sort of design your, the narrative around who you are so that, you know, you get seen and acknowledged for the strengths that you bring. So yeah, I think that's right. I'm reading my notes, and I think,
So I
think that's right.
just
Yeah,
found
self-positioning, major selection, and all that kind of stuff as well. So we'll hope to get through all. That's a lot for one meeting, but
it is. But super helpful. And I don't think that's one topic that we've covered in the past. So it's going to be a new topic. If you're joining us, if you joined us last year and you're joining us this year again, this is a new topic. So definitely encourage everybody to come in, and Ms. Galloway will get something worked out with you to see how we can send those scholarship information emails out. And certainly thank you everybody for coming. If anyone wants to stay back and ask questions, feel free. We'll be here for another 2 minutes exactly before we hop off, and give everybody time back. But if we don't speak to you again, happy Thanksgiving to everyone. And thank you for being part of this process.
thank you. And thank you, Gary, for fearlessly leading us. It looks like we'll give all the Ferris Buellers a minute to voice their question if they still have one, but I'm like Bueller.
I did, I've been adding the recordings to our YouTube channel. One of the playlists has all of them from last year and as a series. And then on the page, on our PTO page that has this topic, it's at the bottom. So anybody who wants to, just do a marathon or who's missed any of them can just hit play and it'll run through everything chronologically. So
so Maria's saying if you want to binge watch, you don't want to watch Miss Maisel or like
Exactly.
Yellowstone.
if you're like, I need Galloway and I need as much Galloway as possible, do it double
awesome.
speed, just hit play. Yeah.
Thank you for doing that. That's awesome.
That's awesome. All
Okay,
right.
well, I think we're good on the timing. Have a wonderful break. I hope everyone is.
When y'all decide on the date,
Yeah,
let
we'll
us
send
know
it
or
out.
just change it on the calendar, please.
We will. Thank
yeah, that'll be
you.
decided probably tomorrow. The guy got back to us this afternoon with 2 options, and so Gary and I just need to sync
Yep.
up with the CVHS calendar to make sure that we're not